I believed that the product we built was really going to change the world.
Mhm.
I saw the data that came in. I knew that it worked. I knew that it was very powerful, and yet the market didn't pick it up. Put
Mhm.
the humans at the center. What is it that makes your people thrive? What is it that fosters an environment for your people to be at their best, doing the things that are most important for you and your business to succeed? Humans are wired for two things, like out of the box. We are wired to stay alive, very important. See
Right.
previous comment about not jumping out of airplanes. And we are wired to, technology is built by people to serve people. And we don't serve the tech serves us.
Welcome to Startup Journeys Founders Unplugged podcast. I'm your host, Paul King, and today we embark on a fascinating journey with a remarkable guest. Before we dive into the heart of our conversation, I want to set the stage for you. Imagine a career path that defies convention, a trajectory marked by twists and turns, from history major to non-profit finance leader, Big Four tax partner, and now head of product and strategy for a tech startup. Our guest today, Dr. Liz Sweigart, is a true testament to the power of embracing diverse opportunities and challenges. Driven by passion for fostering environments where human beings can thrive and flourish, Liz is not only a systems thinker, but also someone who courageously confronts the complexities of mental health. Living with major depressive disorder and OCD, Liz took a year-long leave of absence from PwC in 2020 to focus on her mental wellness, a journey she has openly shared on her blog. As an author and keynote speaker on mental wellness and mental health, Liz is a trailblazer in fostering open conversations, especially within the realms of work and digital well-being. Today we explore the chapters of Liz's life, from pivotal moments that shaped her career to the intersections of mental health, decision-making, and work. Our conversation spans a wide spectrum, touching on the future of work, the challenges of loneliness, and the intricacies of remote work. But that's not all. We'll delve into the funding landscape for social impact startups, exploring the nuances of investing in mental health startups, and the differences between startup markets in the US and Australia. So whether you're navigating your own career, passionate about mental health, or intrigued by the world of startups, this episode is for you. Get ready as we unravel the layers of Liz Sweigart's story, filled with insights, wisdom, and lessons that transcend industries. Hi Liz, and welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Paul. Thank you so much for having me.
It's a great pleasure. So Liz, let's just get straight into it with the first question. So you've had a diverse and fascinating career journey, from a history major to a Big Four tax partner and now in tech. Now, could you share a pivotal moment or decision that significantly shaped your career path?
Oh, that's a good one. And I appreciate how diplomatically you asked that, as opposed to, why can't you keep a job?
Well, I could say the same thing for myself. It's called being an entrepreneurial spirit, I think.
That's it. And I think you just identified it. What was the pivotal moment? It is not a single one, it is a series of them. And
Mhm.
it is the moments of embracing the entrepreneurial spirit. It is the moments of saying yes and taking a leap. I think of that scene in Indiana Jones, where the bridge is there, but you must have faith for it to appear. And when I think about how my career has tracked, looking back on it now, I can connect all the dots. The breadcrumbs are there. At the time, not as readily apparent. But what I've learned is that when I follow my curiosity, and I am relentlessly curious, I love understanding how things work. I love understanding what makes people tick.
Yeah.
When I have followed my curiosity, it has never led me astray. And as I've gone through my career, I realized that I have been led from point to point by that curiosity, a desire to learn, and then to take that learning and apply it. So my career has had this really beautiful arc that has led me to where I am because of curiosity. So it's many moments, and I'm frankly grateful for them.
Yeah, that's I think it's a great attribute to have, and definitely one that you need as an entrepreneur as well. So I'd say many entrepreneurs would have that curiosity, and also, would you say you're a risk taker as well?
It's funny because I don't think I would have defined myself that way early in my life because I've always associated risk taking with things like jumping out of airplanes, and that's not on the menu for me.
Yeah.
I do think that I am someone who has learned to embrace uncertainty. I've learned to be comfortable when I'm uncomfortable.
Mhm.
And in that way, yes, I am a risk taker. And I have certainly learned to embrace the unknown. But I've never set out to say, well, I'm going to take this particular risk. I calculate risk. I think
Mhm.
about it.
Yeah.
As an organizational psychologist, I can tell you that human beings are terrible at gauging risk. I mean, it's
Mhm.
really one of our least. Um, uh, it's not a great area for us. But personally, I have certainly become much more comfortable with the unknown and with uncertainty, and I found that actually sometimes I'm okay when everything's not okay.
Mm. I think that's really important. I think we use our, well, some people call it gut, I call it intuition, to make decisions, and then we can be uncomfortable because it puts it out, us outside of our comfort zone. But that's nearly always when we get the growth.
Yes, growth does not happen in your comfort zone.
No.
Growth requires challenge. It's the same way we build muscle. You don't build muscle without breaking it down. It's one of the things that I've learned, especially throughout my journey in startups. There is no creation absent destruction. I just likened it to building muscle. When you lift weights, when you do resistance and strength exercise, you actually break down the muscle. You shred it essentially.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
that's why sleep and recovery are so important because you get
Yeah.
stronger by breaking down. And the
Yeah.
breaking down is what allows you to build up. So,
Mhm.
absolutely, growth doesn't happen in comfort. And we also have to be mindful that we don't put ourselves in a position where our spirit is broken. So
Yeah.
there's a very sweet spot where growth is encouraged, where we haven't put ourselves so far out that we don't have a firm base to build from, and we will never grow if we're comfortable in our nest.
Yeah, I think that's a really good analogy with muscles. How it breaks down and then we need to recover as well. So, yeah, we all need, when it comes to recovery and mental health and that as well, we can put ourselves in uncomfortable situations, but as long as we're maintaining our mental health, usually if we get that growth out of it, then we will ultimately feel better, just like, you get more muscle growth in that way. But you don't want to put yourself in a situation, I guess, where it can actually affect your mental health. But then on the other hand, if you're just sitting on the couch eating Cheetos all day as well, so to speak, mentally just not doing anything, that can affect your mental health as well. Would you think?
Yes. So, and as you know, mental health is a very important topic to me.
Mm.
Um, There are four major neurotransmitters that love to soak our prefrontal cortex. Three of them, and I'm not going to go into the discourse, but there are three in particular that contribute to sound decision making. They create an environment in our brain for us to exercise good judgment and make good decisions.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's cortisol, which is stress, right? That's that cortisol is what triggers our flight, our fight, or another F word. And that is that is an incredibly important part of our brain chemistry, because without enough stress, we're not getting out of bed. We are not getting off the couch, and we're certainly not putting down the bag of Cheetos. And if we have too much, if we spike that, our ability to ration, to reason, to make good decisions, to exercise our judgment in the best service of ourselves and others goes out the window. So we have an important job to do when it comes to helping our brains to function at their best. And when we think about what the human brain is naturally wired to do, like sort of what's the standard package? Humans are wired for two things, like out of the box. We are wired to stay alive. Very important. Right. See previous comment about not jumping out of airplanes. And we are wired to connect with other humans. Connecting with others is how we see number one, stay alive. And so when you think about what is it that fosters the best environments for us to, again, reason, make good decisions, engage productively with life, it's where we don't feel that our safety and well-being are threatened, because that's again, bad. And they're also places where we are able to connect and to engage with other people. And one of the reasons why the pandemic was so difficult for so many people is because of how restrictions on interactions affected our mental health. Because again, as humans, even those humans who are like, I don't really know that I like other people. We need them. We need each other. And that is one of the most critical elements of our mental health. And also, going back to the startup journey, I was talking to an entrepreneur about this morning. One of the most challenging parts of the journey is staying connected with others, especially if you are out on your own without a co-founder. It is the loneliness, and recognizing it's possible to be alone and not lonely. But it's also possible to be surrounded by people and feeling the loneliest of your life. So absolutely, I am a firm believer that there are times where the couch and Cheetos are part of that recovery and rest that we talked about earlier.
Definitely. It's interesting because when my startup, we had a whole lot of problems in the end after 6 years. When it finished, the way I coped with that sounds crazy, but I started watching the series Breaking Bad. I've always heard about it. I always wanted to watch it. And all I did for 2 weeks, nonstop, on my phone, even if I'm traveling, whatever, is just watch that series. It's like to get my mind completely out of it. That was how I actually coped at that time, interestingly enough.
Well, you found something that held your attention, and was able to distract you from really unpleasant feelings. And again, we talk about what the human brain is wired to do. As human beings, we have a bias against things that cause pain, and we have a bias for things that bring us pleasure, enjoyment, happiness, or at least reduce pain. So it makes a lot of sense that your attention would be captured by something that took you away from the more painful and difficult feelings at the time, and then allowed you some space such that you could return to those when it wasn't so raw and so fresh. And I
Yeah.
love what our brains do for us. If
Yeah.
we let them, our brains give us gifts. It's when we don't let them that things can come off the rails.
Yeah. Yeah. I suppose it would be the same for grief as well, because some people grieve all at different times. Some close family member may pass away, and then they just feel, I don't know, they just can't deal with it at that time, and they might grieve a year or two later.
You're
You know?
spot on. And the interesting thing is the comparisons and the parallels with things that are seemingly opposite. So you mentioned grief. Grief is one of those things that sucker punches you because we have this belief that somehow grief happens on a linear timeline, and it doesn't. Um, there's this sense of, oh, well, you took a week off for bereavement leave, and now you're back, and everything's fine. No, it isn't.
No, of course not.
No, it is not.
No.
You can have years pass, and then out of nowhere, again, grief sucker punches you. The other thing that is similar, though, is wild success. You'll notice that there are people who are met with great success, and
Mhm.
similar to those who are met with overwhelming grief, they have no idea what to do with it. They don't know how to handle it. What it represents is sudden change. In
Mhm.
physics, it's referred to as jerk in mechanics.
Mhm. Mhm.
So, which I find, I love the term because what jerk measures is the change in force and direction. So when something is going in one direction and all of a sudden it is arrested, that moment, that's jerk. And what happens to us in our lives is we're going down a path, and then all of a sudden something significant changes our speed and trajectory. And that moment can be overwhelming, particularly if we haven't built up the psychological tools to deal with
Mhm.
it.
Mhm.
And we see this all the time with people who win the lottery.
Yes. Yeah.
They have no idea what to do
No.
with this.
No.
And similarly, people who are met with overwhelming grief,
Mm.
we aren't equipped as a sort of part of the standard
Mm.
package to necessarily know how to deal with these outsized emotions and the feelings that come along with them.
Yeah.
So absolutely, there is a relationship between grief and success.
Yeah.
And again, coming back to
Interesting.
it, these are two things that, as a startup founder, as an entrepreneur,
Yeah.
you will get to know really well.
Yes. Yes. It's that roller coaster ride. You know, one day you're up here, the next day you're down there. That's really part of the journey. And I've said this before in other podcasts, but I actually had a chat with a psychologist years ago, and they said, look, out of 1 to 10, sometimes you go up to 9 and you go down to 1. Try and keep it between 4 and 6. So don't get too excited when things happen, and don't get too depressed when things don't go right. And if you can try and keep that balance, it is quite helpful.
Yes, I refer to it as the cricket principle.
Okay.
You, fours and sixes are great.
That's good. I like that. I was thinking cricket, like the creature, the insect.
No, no,
I got
yeah,
it. I
well,
got it. Yeah.
yes, well, and I'm
Yeah.
given my natural sort of resting state of awkward, I tend to bring my own crickets. But yes, in that case, it really, if you can just, again, fours and sixes are awesome.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Just going back to what we were talking about before, loneliness and the pandemic, and there's a lot of discussion now around people coming back into the office, and those that don't want to, and some bosses that say, I mean, the recent one was, I think Elon Musk said everyone has to come back. Now, some people think, yeah, that's a good idea. People work better, when they're all together. And you were saying that we do need other people and we need company. But I think you also mentioned we can be alone but with company, or we can be with a lot of people and alone. And I sort of understood that point. But what are your thoughts around that, making people come back to the office? I think it's going to be a hard thing to do. I like personally, I think we should be flexible. and just look at each case. Like for example, we had developers before. They loved working from home. It's just the way they are, and they worked really well. So that was fine. But I have to admit, when we did have the whole team at the incubator at Macquarie Uni, it was a different dynamic as well. But I mean, you look at you do organizational leadership, psychology, and so bringing that knowledge into play. What are your thoughts around that? And particularly for like startup founders that have a small team, what are your thoughts on that?
So the first thought is that the horse has left the barn. It there's a proverb that it is easy to make fish soup. It is difficult to reverse the process. I've heard the same thing expressed relative to toothpaste and tubes.
Yeah.
So yes, I mean, we can torture the metaphors all day. The genie is out of the bottle. It's a thing, right?
Yeah.
It is now a thing.
Yeah.
And people recognize that not only is in fact working remotely, working in virtual teams, working from home, not only is it a thing, but frankly, it has proven to be successful in many settings. Where it becomes more challenging is that there are many professions where working remotely is not an option. Wait staff, for example.
Yeah.
I mean, although the technology continues to improve, we still need surgeons to turn up.
Yeah. Well, my daughter's a vet nurse and she can't do it remotely, so many
No,
applications for that.
no. If some, I unfortunately had to put my dog down about a year ago, and if somebody had suggested that that was going to be done remotely, I would not have been keen about that.
No, for
So
sure.
there's first an acknowledgement of a degree of privilege that we need to make, that those for whom this is even a conversation are the types of workers who are truly knowledge workers primarily,
Mm.
and those whose jobs have been enabled by technology. So there are also a lot of competing interests that come to the fore, and it's important to recognize the agendas that are at the table. So we have agendas from people who own real estate, particularly commercial real estate,
Yeah,
office space.
of
We
course.
have people who have businesses in those offices, and they want to have people coming to their cafes for lunch. The barista really wants to serve people coffee.
Yeah.
So we are we are interconnected and interdependent. And to pretend that that's not true is intellectually dishonest.
Mm.
So whenever we think about this idea of, well, return to office, first I had to squash a few folks who wanted to talk about return to work. I was like, y'all, there was a lot of work getting done during that pandemic. Nobody's coming back to work. In fact, what
Sometimes
we
more
need to
so. Yeah.
well, that's the thing. We've got to
Yeah.
figure out how to get people to maybe work a little bit less, because going back to your earlier point around mental health and well-being, without balance,
Yeah.
there's nothing.
No.
So when we think about like the present and the future of work, there's a lot of these conversations about the future of work. I'm like, the future of work is happening right now, y'all.
Yeah.
Like
Absolutely.
this is an in the moment present thing. So I think that when I think about it, and I think about what is the ethos I want us to bring to it. First, I think we need to have an understanding that those for whom it's even a conversation are coming from a place of privilege. And we need to be asking ourselves, how are we providing equity to those for whom working from home or working remotely will never be an option? Because those tend to also be professions where you don't necessarily have people earning as much.
Mm.
So, how are we ensuring that what we're providing to people is really an equitable? It is equitable. Next, we need to think about, well, what is it that most contributes to us at our best? And you mentioned before, yes, I'm an organizational leadership psychologist, among the many things that I do. But one of the things that we learn in the qualitative research method tradition, in the specific area of what we call participative inquiry, is there's an entire method that's dedicated to something called appreciative inquiry, which is the idea that we can learn a lot about ourselves and how to affect positive and meaningful and productive change if, instead of beginning with this idea of we have a problem to solve, we begin by asking ourselves, what are we at our best? What do we look like at our best? What is the best of us? And what is true when we are acting, performing, behaving at our best? And that's a piece that I feel is largely missing from this conversation when it comes to how we work, whether that is a culture of remote work, a culture of in person, or a hybrid. And so for entrepreneurs and founders, because I have this conversation with them frequently, and it's something I think about myself. What does it look like when we're at our best? And in many cases, that looks like us collaborating with one another side by side. Then the question becomes, okay, if that's what we look like at our best when we're innovating on product, or when we are interacting with our users or our potential users, we're doing research, we're testing. If we're at our best when we are co-located, when we're together, then how do we create spaces where we have that when we're doing that type of work? You mentioned developers.
Yeah.
There are quite a few developers who would be very happy if they never encountered humanity again.
Yes.
And then there are others who are, I mean, people are people, right? There's things that we like and things we don't like. We're all different. But there are types of work that really do lend themselves to being very focused and uninterrupted.
Yeah.
So in those places, what allows someone to be at their best when they're coding? Frankly, it may be being all by themselves in a cave. All right.
Pretty much.
How do we foster that? I think what we need to think about in this conversation is that right now, everything is centering the workplace. It is centering the office space. It is not centering the human beings. Put the humans at the center. What is it that makes your people thrive? What is it that fosters an environment for your people to be at their best, doing the things that are most important for you and your business to succeed? Do those things. When we put the human beings at the center, as opposed to, and I mentioned before, many competing agendas, including I have a lease on office space.
Yes.
When we center the lease on office space and not the people, that's where we go wrong. So put people at the center, identify what it is that creates the environment where your people can be at their best and contribute to the success of the organization. Do that. We
That's
do that,
perfect.
we win.
That's perfect. And that's changing the mindset. Some people may not even think like that. They might not even realize that. And then when you put your people as center, then they're going to be much more productive as well, because they're going to be happier, and they're going to, happy employees work better, and they're more dedicated. And if you look after them, so I really like that. Yeah, that's the way to think about this, putting our people at center instead of, like you said, the office or whatever it may be.
People want to know that you care. People want to know that you are invested in them. As a business owner, as a manager, people want to know that you see them as people, not as numbers or resources or, help us, capital. No, you're not an asset. You're a person. So
Yes,
how do we help people to feel cared for, invested in, and centered?
yeah, yeah.
Because people are the business.
And I think in the startup world, like, it's pretty hectic, and there's a lot going on, and you're doing a million things, but still taking the time to really care about your people, really know what's going on with them and what they like, will actually pay off anyway. And
Oh,
it's the right thing to do, of
absolutely.
course.
It is. I mean, it's
Yeah.
astonishing how the right thing to do often yields the best outcomes. In fact,
Amazing.
pretty much always. And you brought up technology, and I think it's important to also recognize, and this is something I see frequently, particularly in companies that are at the bleeding edge of technology.
Mm-hmm.
There is a hyper focus on the tech.
Mm.
It's one of the things that, when I get pulled in as an advisor with various startups, one of the first things I always look to see is, who does technology report to? If technology doesn't report to the business, if technology doesn't report up to the product owner, uh,
Mm-hmm.
usually that's a sign things are going to go off the rails,
Yes.
because fundamentally, technology is built by people to serve people. And we don't serve the tech serves us. And the tech doesn't exist on its own. The tech exists because people built it.
Mm.
So business is personal because business is people.
Yeah.
And when we lose sight of that, when we lose sight of the humanity, our humanity, um, that's where we get some pretty awful results. And you only have to scan the news headlines to see where things have come off the rails, because people have centered things other than human beings in their
Yeah.
work.
And that brings up a topic, AI. So, what are your thoughts on that around what you were just been talking about?
Oh my goodness, my thoughts on AI. Hang on, let me ask ChatGPT. So I am fascinated by artificial intelligence, mostly because I've always really loved algebra. And that's
Mhm.
essentially fundamentally what you're talking about. You're talking about a series of incredibly complex algorithms that are able to take so many variables and essentially weight them, and then use the output of these equations to predict correct answers, or what will be perceived as a correct answer to a particular input, a question, a
Mhm.
prompt.
Mhm. Mhm.
And where it's often difficult for people who don't have a grounding in how AI works, to understand what's happening, is that they perceive that the system is answering the question um, by relying on what it knows about the subject matter. That's not really correct.
Mhm.
What these algorithms do is they predict. They predict that based on a particular input, an output that they construct has a very high likelihood of pleasing the user who input it. It has a high likelihood of correctly, or perceived as correctly, answering the prompt. And so I think one of the challenges is that um, AI is able to recombine, and it's able to take information and put it together in ways that we would consider new and novel, because
Mhm.
again, it's constructing it essentially mathematically.
Yeah.
What I remain unconvinced of is that it is truly innovating new knowledge. It's actually contributing new knowledge. It's
Mhm.
reconfiguring, it's putting things back together again. But I'm still a firm believer that there really isn't anything new under the sun. It's a
Mhm.
question of how we recognize connections. And these algorithms are able to see systems. Uh, Essentially, they're operating in chaos, right? So when you think of chaos theory tells us that what looks to us like something completely muddled, and all of these unrelated pieces and parts, are actually part of incredibly complex adaptive systems,
Mhm.
where you can trace the butterfly flapping its wings to the typhoon on the other side of the world.
Okay.
So what AI has now given us is an ability to uh, combine and recognize relationships between information that our brains would not be able to do on their own.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there's a lot of fear mongering, and there always is with something new, and something so seemingly powerful. I think that there's a bit of misinformation and a lack of understanding in the general public about how AI necessarily works. I do think that we have to be very mindful and intentional about how we use it, because as with any new and seemingly amazing technology, there's a desire to overuse it.
Yeah.
uh, especially when I'm talking to founders, because right now, there are a few things that are attracting as much funding as anyone who's got Gen AI in the description
Mm.
of their business.
Yeah.
Um, One of the most important things to begin with is is AI is AI the tool best suited to solve the problem that you've identified?
Yeah.
And again, we have this sort of overwhelming desire. It's sort of, it gets into a little bit into sort of Maslow's hammer, right? Like when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. When you are really excited about something new and novel, like AI, everything looks like AI should be the solution.
Mm.
And it isn't.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we need to be thoughtful about fit for purpose and about using the right tools for the right jobs. So AI has great promise. I think a lot of the fears about the devastation that AI will bring upon us, um, some of those are fair. A lot of the criticism is fair and
As
needs
in
to be thought
jobs? You're
through.
talking about as in loss of jobs?
As in everything. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
there's so AI's ability to create um, deep fakes, right? The ability to
Mm.
trick us, the ability to AI. Certainly, we saw this a lot with earlier models. ChatGPT was rife with this, especially in GPT-3. Its ability to hallucinate.
Mm-hmm.
It would come up with books that were never written. It would, right? I mean, essentially, it invented facts,
Right.
um, right? Which is problematic,
It is.
deeply problematic. And
Yeah.
we've seen what spreads on social media. We've seen this impact politics, elections. We've seen this.
Mm.
I mean, it has far-ranging and serious implications for people's lives. So AI has a lot of promise. Um, AI will change jobs, but every new technology changes jobs.
Yeah.
When the automobile was invented, that changed a whole lot of jobs. There was an entire industry around horses and buggies.
Yeah.
Those
Not many
industries,
blacksmiths survive that one.
no, not again. Now, not a thing.
Yeah.
And we adapted. That's what we do. Human
Yeah.
beings change. There's this myth that humans are naturally resistant to change. We're not.
Yeah.
All we do from the time we are born is change. If we were that resistant to change, none of us would be walking. We'd still be crawling.
That's
Heck,
true.
we might not even have started crawling in the first place. We might still be on the couch eating Cheetos.
Interesting. It's a very interesting topic, and I think in the startup space, it may kill some startups, and it may be the beginning of a lot of other startups as well. And it may help some startups and maybe not with others. So it depends how you use it as well. I have to admit, I do use it quite a bit, because I've gone from a team of up to like 12 down to a team of uno myself at the moment, which I'm actually enjoying. And so it's making me a bit more productive in that way. So, um, yeah, but yeah, interesting points that you brought up there. So let's go into another area now. So, Liz, you've been very open about your journey with major. Sorry, okay, I'll do that question again. Liz, you've been open about your journey with major depressive disorder and obsessive compulsive disorder (OCD). How have these experiences influenced your approach to work and leadership, and what advice would you give others facing similar challenges?
Ooh, well, first, thank you for that. I really appreciate any opportunity to tell a bit of my story and just speak about mental health openly and transparently, um, because there's the stigma thrives in the darkness, and it dies in the light. So I am very happy to talk openly about my experience with mental health, because I needed me to have done that when I was at the worst stages of my life. I needed a me. I needed to see someone who I could identify with. And so I just hope that I can be that for others now. Um, so yes, as you mentioned, I have lived really since the end of my teenage years with depression, and it was while I was in recovery from a major depressive episode that started in mid of 2018, and continued well into 2020. But in 2019, the end of the year, actually, it's funny. It's about it's exactly like 4 years ago now. I was suicidal. I was actively suicidal. Um, and while I was in recovery from that, major depressive episode, and from my suicidality, that was when I was also diagnosed with OCD. And OCD, as it is represented in the media, is horribly mischaracterized.
Okay.
I will say that the people with whom I live would love it if I was a neat freak. I am not. A lot of what's presented as OCD in the media doesn't really reflect what the disorder is like. As I experience it, it is intrusive thoughts, things I don't want to, things that just come into my brain and take up a lot of space. And those thoughts become obsessions, and they build over time, and the anxiety and the worry that those thoughts create ultimately leads to taking action. And that action is what is the compulsive behavior.
Okay.
And what always sort of baffled me before I was actually diagnosed was this belief that people would perceive my actions as impulsive. So an example of one of these, I would have a thought enter my head that if I didn't take a certain number of steps every day, we all, the wearables have become a thing, and everybody needs their 10,000 steps.
Yeah.
But this thought would enter my head that if I didn't get my 10,000 steps, then something awful would happen to my fitness and my physical health and well-being. And I'm not going to go into further detail because it's not particularly helpful. But I would tie these steps. I would become just obsessed with this, because if I didn't do this, something really bad would happen to me physically.
Okay.
And that would then manifest itself in me doing the strangest of things, like walking laps around my community at night, walking in circles in my driveway. And it was behavior that was just incredibly puzzling to other people. But if I didn't do that, I couldn't get that anxiety, that obsession to go away. And that's how I did it.
Yeah.
So what I have developed since being diagnosed is a whole set of tools to recognize when those thoughts are happening.
Okay.
Similar to living with depression, I can recognize now my self-awareness has increased. So I have a sense as to what's going on with me, and I now have tools. I can do something about that. I have agency. It's not something that I'm not subject to the whims of my jerk brain. I can take action. I know what to do. I know that there is help. I know how to reach out now in ways I didn't before. So how my mental health journey has informed my life now is really one of heightened self-awareness, much greater awareness of what's happening around me, how my environment is impacting me, how I'm impacting my environment, how others are responding to me, how I'm responding to them, and then an increase in my ability to self-regulate. I am able to take in this information. I'm able to take my self-awareness and my situational awareness and put them together. And I am able to make good decisions for me because I recognize that I have the power, the agency to do so.
Mm-hmm.
And before, I treated a lot of things as triggers. So there's stimuli, and stimuli prompt a response.
Yep.
Triggers are stimuli that either we believe or for whatever reason uh, trigger a specific response with no consideration. And now I have been able to take stimuli that before I believed I could only respond to in one way. And now I can think about how I want to respond. And I recognize that I am not forced into one response simply because I encounter a particular stimulus. So it is an ongoing journey, and it's one that I am very grateful to have had the right types of support, professional help. I've been able to access it, and we need one to decrease the stigma associated with mental health.
Yeah.
I'm not embarrassed or ashamed by my mental health, and I don't want anyone else to be. And we need to increase access and opportunity to get help, and have people who can deliver that help in ways that are culturally competent so that people are able to access care providers who can truly empathize with them.
Absolutely, and telling your story as well is really helpful for people. I did interview. I don't know if you heard of Graham Cowan. He wrote the book Back from the Brink, and he was saying he wrote that book, which was all about interviewing others with depression and hearing about their stories and their journey, because that's what helped him when he was really depressed as well. You know, listening to them and how they came out of it, and he did a survey with I think over 4,000 people, and there's all different ways that people came out of it and things that helped them. It's sort of individual to everybody. But there are some that were generally more effective than others. So that's a good book to look up, Back from the Brink. But really appreciate your story on that, Liz, because not everybody's open on that. And I do think it's great when, appreciate your openness, and I'm sure it will help others as well, listening to your story.
Thank you.
So, Liz, going on to another topic now, and something that we've discussed previously around funding. So I've interviewed quite a few impact startup founders and people like Cameron Neal from Red Hat Impact, all about the funding landscape, particularly for the social impact startups and that sort of thing. And there's a big gap, $91 billion just in Australia alone, between that, mum and dad investing and then the angel investors or VCs that want to invest at least $1 million. And so I've also interviewed Australian VC, Nick McNaughton, and I asked him about that as well, because he was a VC for many years, an investor, and he seems to think that. I asked him about the difference between the US and Australia, and he said it's to do with tax incentives in Australia, and he also said sustainability of that. And I know I've talked with others that really that sustainability shouldn't be such an issue, because a lot of these, actually I was talking with someone yesterday, and that's a lady who I'm going to do another podcast with, Lucretia de Jong, and she's all in that space, and she's helping all of those startups. She's saying, look, these are sustainable, a lot of these, and sometimes they don't treat them seriously, like they're not serious startups or businesses. And the example was actually the podcast that was released yesterday with Rochelle Rich from Emotions, and she had a story where she had a tragedy in her family, a suicide, and from that she created a business that is donating 50% to in here in Australia we have Beyond Blue, Black Dog Institute, and Lifeline, all for mental health and helping those organisations. And so her background is 15 years in finance. She actually had a startup as well. and she's a serious business person. You know what I mean? But many investors will look at her like, oh no, she's in that space. It's not that serious, not that sustainable. Anyhow, what are your thoughts around that? Because you've experienced both. I mean, you've been in Australia a lot. You've worked here, as I understand it, and you're in the US. So, what are your thoughts around that, and what do you see as the differences between the two? And in the future, I actually want to do a forum. I'm going to call it a funding forum with a lot of these people I spoke about, and I'll also invite you, Liz. So it's something I'm becoming quite passionate about, because these organizations, these startups, they need funding, and they're doing good things, and it's something I'd like to be part of a resolution for that.
Well, I love that. And, you don't have to twist my arm to talk about this, or be involved further. So I think one of the important things to note, differences in when we think about startup markets, US versus Oz. Australia is an incredible place to have a startup, because you have a high-powered economy, you have very sophisticated citizenry, you've got this perfect kind of microcosm, whereas in the US, you've got size and scale, but man, is it hard to break into size and scale. It is very easy to get swallowed up in the US startup landscape, because it's so hard to differentiate yourself. And as a result, people tend to glom onto the things that they've heard of. And those are what we have typically referred to in the past as unicorns,
Yes.
particularly in the tech space.
Yeah.
And here's the thing. Unicorns are like synergies. They don't exist in the wild. There has been this relentless focus on, we have to get the hockey stick growth, right? You're referring to the way that the revenue just takes off. It's not numerical. It's exponential growth. Exponential growth's not really a thing. And when we end up in a model that lionizes these unicorns, or at least the pursuit of these unicorns, people start to think, well, in order to get funding, I have to present myself as if I'm a unicorn.
Exactly.
Businesses are not good. No.
No.
In fact, the majority of businesses that we need aren't set up for that kind of growth. They couldn't scale it. They couldn't sustain it. And frankly, it doesn't fit the market. So when we talk about this idea of sustainability, it's not a new concept, first of all. And second of all, it's about creating businesses that serve people. Again, human-centered business. So the VC landscape is one that has gravitated toward the belief that these unicorns are all out there and we're going to get 44x returns. Yeah. The people, and big shout out to Cam Neal and to Red Hat Impact, and just all of the people who are really innovating in this space, the capital innovators. Yeah. They recognize that there is an important role for financing to play in the creation and the sustaining of valuable, necessary businesses that grow out of communities in response to a need. Yeah. And as rightly pointed out by your other guest, there are roles that government has to play in this. Cam, I know, frequently talks about that missing middle, right, between what mom and dad get you, and what you're going to get in the VC space. There's another piece to consider as well, and that is one that we see I see all the time in the US. Companies that want to focus on being impactful in communities are drawn to these structures. We call them sometimes B Corps or purpose companies. These are organizations where the charter of the business and the way that it's registered with the government is about creating a business that fits a specific purpose, typically around a kind of social impact. Now, in the States, what this gets you is it gets you some leeway on your governance, because typically we're looking at fiduciary responsibility, meaning that the management team that has had the day-to-day operations of the business delegated to it by a board of directors who represent the shareholders are tasked with producing the highest possible return to the shareholders and protecting their capital investment, protecting the owner's equity. That's where a lot of shareholder lawsuits come from, is when there is a belief that that fiduciary responsibility of producing the highest and best result for the shareholders has been violated. And so giving companies leeway to say, actually, we're not about making decisions that provide the highest return to shareholders. We're about making decisions that best serve the mission, that best serve the purpose. That's very important because, again, U.S., very litigious society. That's where a lot of our shareholder lawsuits come from. What the B Corp structure doesn't do is address tax. So what you end up with is the way that I sort of articulate the missing middle is a bit different from Cam's. My concern is that you have either a charity, which is essentially infantilization, especially in the US, where our rules, for shorthand, right, our nonprofits are referred to as 501c3s because that's the section of the tax code that they're covered by. But our nonprofits have rules that limit the amount of income that they can earn from activities that are not completely aligned with the purpose of their charter. Basically, what they said they were going to do to get their tax exempt status is all that they can do. Okay. And there's a lot of ambiguity, and that uncertainty, we talked about uncertainty earlier, pushes people away from taking on other activities or expanding the business in ways that could make it sustainable, could make it self-supporting. But there is great concern that those activities will cause the organization to lose its tax-exempt status. And it recognizes that it can't actually maintain itself if all it has is that business income. It needs donations. It needs additional types of support. So you end up either with something that's fully charitable and never going down the path toward true sustainability as a business. Yeah. Or you have people who are out there trying to present themselves to VCs as if they're going to have this hockey stick growth and produce, 40 plus X returns. Yeah. You either have full commercial or you have full charitable. And the middle section is unaddressed by our current tax code. And so you don't really have incentives. The incentives aren't structured properly. Now, the good news for Australians, and frankly for the Brits as well, there are lots of other countries on the planet that have figured out better ways. Nobody's perfect, but there are better ways. So when I think about, this the whole question of sustainability, every business's goal is sustainability. You want a business that is going to sustain itself and that is going to throw off returns that allow you to reinvest back into growing the business and reward those whose blood, sweat, and tears went into creating it. And I would also argue you want a business that is also able to provide a return to the community that is sustaining it, especially if the business is relying on uncompensated community members. This is an issue that we see in tech all the time when it comes to data. Use of people's data and taking that data, analyzing it, using it to further a product to make more money without any type of compensation, sometimes without even any acknowledgement or even knowledge of the people whose data is being used. So I completely agree with Cam that we need capital innovation that addresses that middle space between, the bank of mom and dad and what we get in a venture setting. And I believe that we need better structures, particularly from a tax perspective, that incentivize companies to find these hybrid spaces where there is both contribution as well as income earned from activities. Because ultimately, what we want businesses that are self-sustaining. We want businesses that are able to meet a need and continuously meet that need, continue to innovate, create jobs, and solve challenges in our communities, make us better selves. So that's an area where there's a lot of work to do, but I am inspired daily by the people that I see doing that work.
Fantastic. Yeah, no, great explanation of that whole area. Um, it's quite intricate, and there's a whole lot of different factors going on there. So, all right. So this podcast is to help early stage startup founders and new startup founders, particularly overcome challenges and also failures as well. And even though you're a highly successful person, could you talk about some time in your life or your career where you had a major fail and how you went through it, how you felt, and how you came out of that?
Thank you for that. It's funny thinking about it. I'm like, I don't really see my life as an unbridled success. Um, well, I have been part of startups that have not gone.
Mm-hmm.
I think you and I both share that. Um, a few things that I've learned. You're going to indulge me. I'm going to give you a couple of things that I've learned along the way.
Okay.
Um, when when I was part of a startup that again didn't go, um, I I learned something very important, and that is the distinction between humility and humiliation.
I like that.
Humility is
Mm-hmm.
mandatory.
Mm.
Like you and I, everyone listening, is going to experience times in your life where you are humbled. I believed that the product we built was really going to change the world.
Mm-hmm.
I saw the data that came in. I knew that it worked. I knew that it was very powerful, and yet the market didn't pick it up.
Yeah.
And that was very humbling because I put everything of myself into that. I left as sort of they say I left everything on the field, and it didn't go.
I know
And
that feeling.
that hurt.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
still hurts. And it doesn't hurt to the point that I can't do anything else, but it was very humbling because I really thought that if I just did all the things right, if I just did all the right behaviors, the right result would happen. And it didn't. Not from my perception of the right result. From the market's perception, yes, the right result happened. It didn't go. But that was hard for me.
Yeah.
The distinction, though, is that I didn't have to be humiliated by it. Humiliation is something we take on from others. There's this psychology concept called felt understanding. It's very meta. And essentially, what it says is how we change our behaviors based on what we think other people think about us.
Mm.
So we spend, and I'll say I'll speak for myself. I spend an inordinate amount of time concerning myself with what I think other people think about me. And it's so wasted. It is so completely wasted because other people are too busy thinking about themselves. Because again, that's what human beings do. So we get to a place where we are so concerned about how others see or perceive this failure, our failure. We are a failure. I'll get to that one in a second.
Mm.
But we get really wrapped up in this. And that's where the humiliation comes in, because the humiliation is what we put on ourselves based on what we think other people think. And
Mm.
number one, other people aren't really thinking about us. They're thinking about
Mm.
themselves.
Yeah.
And two, we don't have to take on anything we don't want to take on. So
Yes.
yes, humility is mandatory. Humiliation is optional.
I love
And
that.
picking up on the bit about failure, this was sort of the other major thing that has helped me particularly in startup environments. Failure is not an identity. I am not a failure.
Yeah.
Something I did failed. Failure is an event. It happens.
Yeah.
And it presents an opportunity to learn. You know what else isn't an identity? Success. I am not a success. I have had successes, but
Mm-hmm.
my identity is not tied to those.
Yeah.
Who I am is not tied to the titles, the roles, the responsibilities, the accolades, the awards, or anything else. That was, I think, the biggest thing that I got out of my mental health recovery journey was a sense of my own identity. I
Mm.
realized that I'd gone through most of my adult life introducing myself based on the equivalent of name, rank, and serial number. I would say my job title and the firm I worked for before I would ever get to any other aspect of my identity. And it was very warped. So success is not an identity. Failure is not an identity. They are events. And how we choose to define ourselves, that's up to us. But those events are not what defines us. And as entrepreneurs, as founders, it is so seductive and oftentimes easy to become wrapped up with our identities as our startups,
Yeah.
and they're not. They are their own thing, and what happens with them are events, and we can feel I'm very invested, very invested, and they're not us. No company has ever been me. I may be the driving force behind it. I may be the founder, but it sits off on its own. I've done it. It's part of my experience, but it is not my identity. And being able to distinguish in that is, to me, very important to maintaining our overall wellness and well-being as founders. Because, and I know, Paul, I do not have to tell you this, entrepreneurship is hard.
It
It is
sure is.
really, really hard. And it's also so worth it. It's so worth
Yes.
it. It's so
So rewarding
rewarding.
and hard.
It
Yes.
is, it is,
Yeah.
but it's like all the really good things in life. There's a there I'm a Peloton aficionado, and there is a Peloton instructor named Dennis Morton, and he has a line where he says, "I don't want the things I do in life to be easy. I want them to be worth the effort."
Mm.
And that is become very much my mantra. I don't want or expect the things that I do to be easy, but I do want them to be worth the effort.
I love that. That was a beautiful explanation, and to have that humility, but not be humiliated. I think a lot of people will take that advice, and it's really about understanding who you are as a person, or who you are spiritually, whatever you want to call it. And that's not your startup, your business, your title, your success, the failure, which you will learn from and progress from there, is not your identity. And on top of that, I mean, I interviewed a gentleman, Peter Brown, who's was an actor, and he's helped a lot of startups and pitching and everything else. And he's saying, no, you haven't failed. If you, let's say, for example, you're a young man and you've had a startup for 2 years and it hasn't worked out, and you're going for a job interview, you say, look, I had a startup for 2 years. I've learned so much about marketing and sales and development and how to be part of a team, and so many things that you've actually learned, that probably more so than being just in one job. There's actually, you take that with you. You take the experience and learn from that. So yeah, humility, not humiliation. That's beautiful advice. Love that. Thanks for that, Liz. It was very good. I think that'll
Absolutely.
help a lot of people. Okay, so just to finish up, I know that was some sort of advice, but if there was only one piece of advice, one, you could give an early startup founder, what would that be?
Get comfortable, or even excited about being seen trying. One of the things I love about open source, and really the whole movement around the decentralized web, D-Web, what we're seeing happening in technology is that people are trying in public. And it going back to humiliation,
Yes,
um,
exactly.
it is hard to be seen trying. I am very, very proud for people to see me trying. I am very happy to try in public because what that does, first of all, is it's a really great way to help manage expectations. The key to happiness in life, in pretty much every dimension, is expectation management. With
Yes.
startups in particular, we have a great idea, and then we've got to go build. We build our MVP, and every MVP kind of sucks because it's an MVP.
Yeah.
Um, where things get sideways, and it's funny. I mean, it's so interesting to me, this, like, from a systems perspective, how much resonance there is between these things. It's something that I used to tell folks on my team when I was a tax partner, and they would want to go and spend all this time creating a deck, and they wouldn't want me to see it. And, they were really stealth and covert. Oh, it's got to be perfect. I've got to. And I was like, here's the thing. What you think is perfect, I'm really not going to be that happy with. I can just tell you that right now. So do this. Show me what you're working on as you're working on it, and we can course correct. But I promise you, I will be much happier seeing a work in progress that I know is a work in progress than I will seeing something you think is fully formed and I'm pretty sure is barely a work in progress. So in the startup space, being willing to put your stuff out there early, often, openness to feedback, that's what helps you build a community. People love to see other people trying because it inspires them. You could take a page out of Rocky Balboa's book. And, it doesn't mean you have to run up the steps in
Yeah.
Philadelphia,
Okay.
but your willingness to be seen trying, your willingness to put things out there when you know that they're not fully formed or they're imperfect, and be honest about that, transparent.
Yeah.
That's what gets people on your side, because people want to root for you. That's the thing. Like, there are so many people who want to see you succeed, and they vastly outnumber those who would ever want you to fail.
Yes.
Give yourself the gift of trying in public and being willing to put yourself out there such that you can get that feedback. You can build that community, because that's inspiring to people. And people want brands that inspire them. People
Absolutely.
want to be inspired.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter how mundane you may perceive your product to be. You have the opportunity to inspire people, not necessarily through the product, but through you and your willingness to show your effort. So my advice is, be seen trying, show your work, and embrace the feedback and the support that will come from doing that.
That would have been great advice for me in my early stage, because when you're first starting, maybe the first year, you want to like appear, because you're trying to deal with some big brands and stuff like that, and you're comparing yourself to them, and so you think, oh, you have to appear like you're one of them as well. It just doesn't work. It's just more, like you said, most people, if you're just open and genuine and you're trying, then they will follow you and they will help you. So that's some great advice.
Comparison is the thief of joy.
I like that too. Yes, absolutely, absolutely. I actually just this is a pretty silly story, but just something that came to my mind from years ago. I talked to this elderly taxi driver, and we're having a conversation. He kept saying, "I'm a millionaire. I'm a millionaire." I'm like, and he said, "Why do you keep saying that?" I said, "Yeah, compared to the people in Africa, I'm a millionaire, even if I have $100, So he was very happy. And it's all about perspective, so being grateful as well, being
Mhm.
grateful for what you have. Yeah. Yeah.
Practicing an attitude of gratitude.
Yes. Well, Liz, look, really appreciate your time today. Wonderful advice. Love chatting with you, and I'll have to get you on that forum as well. So love to have you back again, and I'm sure this will be very helpful to a lot of people. And so, yeah, thank you very much, and I hope you um, enjoy the rest of your day. I'll probably cut that
Thank
out.
you.
I might joke, but
No, Paul, don't cut it. Be seen
okay,
trying, because
okay,
you inspire all of the people who say, I can't have a podcast because I
right,
won't speak perfectly. And you know what?
yeah.
Your imperfection is what makes you perfect.
And you know something, that was a bit of my issue when I first started, because I don't have, I'm not a very, I wouldn't say a very articulate person. And I didn't, like, I left high school in year 11 and I worked in lots of different jobs. I did go back and do a teaching degree and a couple of diplomas and all that, but I still see myself, my language is pretty low level compared to others. Sometimes I'll get intimidated by academics, but then now I'm sort of over it. I'm thinking, you know what? It's just being me, just being genuine, and that in itself is what people will relate to, I think.
Paul, you are the gift. You are more than enough. You are more than enough. And you are where you need to be, doing what you need to be doing, and giving people a platform to get out messages that are inspiring and necessary for others to succeed. So it seems as if whatever your journey was, it's gotten you to exactly the right place for you. And I am grateful for that. So thank
Thank
you
you
so
very
much for
much.
having me on.
Okay. Thanks so much, Liz.